Chod Moed, or some say Moedim La Simcha. Great to be learning with you in the Litvax Sukkah. Let's light up the darkness. Okay, Facebook doing its Facebook thing, but I think we're still broadcasting. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you this evening. Who's in the house? Excuse me. Shandora in the Bronx, Yehud in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Karen in Northern California, Sai the Talmud Cat loving the music, Lorraine in Texas, Bill in mid-Missouri, Ella in Southern California, Marjorie in Georgia, Chaim in Florida, Spencer in Connecticut. Welcome everybody. Our daf tonight is page 118 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Yes, here in chapter 8 of Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud. So we've been talking about instances based on the story of the daughters of Selofchad in the Torah, where not only do children inherit from their parents, but sometimes parents inherit from the children, and this causes us to sometimes sort of backdate or backtrack an inheritance back up to the parents or grandparents and then back down. So the main thing we've been talking about is that the Torah seems to create a little bit of an inner contradiction because it seems to imply that the portions of land allotted to the children of Israel when they entered the promised land after the 40 years of wandering in the desert. So how were the portions of land allotted to the families of the Jewish people? Was it according to the census of those who came out of Egypt at the time of coming out of Egypt, shortly after we left Egypt after the miracles, the crossing the Red Sea, etc., and then there was a census? Or is it according to the population and the census and the count that was taken shortly before entering the land, 40 years later? And this will make a difference if some families who came out of Egypt had a lot more kids than other families who, when they came out of Egypt, had fewer kids, right? So if it's according to the people who came out of Egypt, and then somebody had a lot of kids, okay, so then each of those kids is going to get a smaller portion than other young people whose parents had fewer kids. Or if we allot it just according to the actual people who are entering the land, maybe that's going to be a little bit more fair because it's the people who are actually entering the land. But we have verses to support both views. So we're in the midst of some questions that Rav Papa is asking Abaye about this. We're right at the top of 118a. And with the second question that Rav Papa asks. So Rav Papa said to Abaye, granted, according to the one who says that the land of Israel, Eretz Yisroel, was divided among those who left Egypt, right? So the earlier census conducted shortly after we left Egypt. So this is why the daughters of Selofchad cried out in protest of the fact that they would be denied their father's portion, to which he was entitled as one of the adult Jews who left Egypt. But according to the one who says that Eretz Yisroel was divided among those who were entering the land, meaning the later census, so why did they cry out in protest? After all, Selofchad was not there to take his portion, so his daughters should have no claim to the land. Abaye answers him, rather, according to this opinion, the protest of the daughters of Selofchad was in reference to the returning of the portions from the generation that entered Eretz Yisroel to the generation that left Egypt, as described in the Baraisa above. And we had the example of just as a Kohen who sends his sons to the threshing floor to collect teruma, the portions assigned to the Kohanim, to the priests, so they would go to his children at the threshing floor, but then the children would turn it over to him. and then he would divide it among his children, his heirs, and and so the portions might end up allotted a little differently than what the children and grandchildren of this Cohen received at the threshing floor. So likewise, okay, it was allotted among the people who are entering the land, but then it was sort of back inherited to their fathers and grandfathers, and then passed down again. A kind of allotment and re-allotment is Abaye's answer. And accordingly, the daughters of Zelophehad demanded to take their portion in the property of their grandfather, Hefer, who received land posthumously through his children, who are their uncles. Now, the Gemara presents Rav Papa's third question. So granted, according to the one who says that the land of Israel was divided among those who left Egypt, the earlier census, so this is why the descendants of Joseph cried out in protest of the fact that they would receive an inadequate portion of land due to the fact that they had proliferated greatly in the wilderness. As it is written, now this is from the book of Joshua, chapter 17, verse 14, and the children of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, "Why have you given me but one lot and one part for an inheritance, seeing I am a great people, because the Lord has blessed me thus?" Right? So what are we talking about? Remember that Joseph had two children in Egypt, Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph's father Jacob, promoted his grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh, to the level of his children. And that's why when you look at the 12 tribes that are going to enter the land of Israel and divide up the regions of Israel among them, you don't see a region called Joseph. You see Ephraim and Manasseh. And Ephraim and Manasseh, even though you would think that each one would be about half the size of one of the other tribes, since they were sort of a generation later than Joseph, nonetheless, because they multiplied quickly and fruitfully, they are tribes about the same size as Judah and Dan and Asher and Zebulun and Issachar, etc., the other 12 tribes of Jacob. Levi, right, that was the son, the Levites, who did not get a portion of land because they receive a tithe and their portion is the Lord, and they conduct the matters of the Holy Temple. So they don't get a piece of land. Ephraim and Manasseh do, but they end up being about the same size as the other tribes, and maybe they had even more kids as they were going into the land of Israel. So they were saying, hey, we're really big tribes. We should get the land allotted according to the number of people who are entering the land, so that every family who's now getting a portion is going to get a portion about the same size. But if our tribe is so much bigger and you are allotting the land according to those who left Egypt, okay, so it's because we had a lot of kids during those years in the wilderness that were in a sense being penalized. So that would, and because they are complaining, we see them complaining in the book of Joshua, this would be evidence that the land was allotted according to the census taking as people were leaving Egypt, rather than the census taken as people were entering the land. But the Gemara continues, so that would be evidence that way. But according to the one who says that the land of Israel was divided among those who entered Eretz Yisroel, what is the reason that the descendants of Joseph were crying out? They were all entitled to take their own portion of land, and then they would have had no cause to complain, right? If it's done according to, sorry about the police chopper, but if it's all being divided according to the census taken late, then they would each get a portion like everybody else. They would have no reason to complain. Like I said, this is evidence that the land was apportioned according to the earlier census. And the Gemara answers, they protested due to the children, as they had many children who were entitled to a portion of the land. Exactly. So Abaye answers Rav Papa, learn from the fact that the Bible records the complaints of only the daughters of Zelophehad and the descendants of Joseph, that there was not one other individual who did not take a portion of land. As if it enters your mind that there were even one other person who did not take a portion of land, He should have cried out in protest. And if you would say, well, the verse wrote about the ones who cried out and their protest was effective, and the verse did not write about people who cried out and their protest was not effective, well, that's difficult, because there is the counterexample of the descendants of Joseph. They cried out and they didn't get more. The daughters of Zelophehad cried out and they got more. So therefore, it's not that the Torah records the protests of those whose protest succeeded, because the protest of the descendants of Joseph did not succeed, and nonetheless, it's recorded in the Bible. Now, the Gemara rejects Abaye's inference. Well, generally, the verse would not record an instance where one cried out if his protest was not effective. And there, the verse does include the protest of Joseph's descendants, not because they were effective, but rather to teach us some good advice. Okay? The light I was using has failed, but luckily our overhead light is still pretty good, and I think you can see me. So we can keep going. Okay. And what is this good advice? That a person should be wary of the evil eye. And this is what Joshua said to them, as it is written. And Joshua said unto them, these descendants of Joseph who complained, if you be a great people, go up to the forest and cut down for yourself there in the land of the Perizzites and of the Rephaim. That's Joseph 17:15. And the Gemara explains that Joseph said to them, go and conceal yourselves in the forests, so that the evil eye will not have dominion over you. Now we're on page 118b. And what does this mean? Joseph's descendants said to him, well, we are of the descendants of Joseph, upon whom the evil eye had no dominion. As it is written, Joseph is a fruitful vine by a fountain. Ale ayin. This is Genesis 49:22. These are the blessings that Jacob gave on his deathbed. And Rabbi Abahu states a homiletic interpretation. Do not read it as ale ayin, rather read it as ole ayin, above the eye, meaning he transcended the influence of the evil eye. Joseph's descendants were saying that they also do not need to be wary. Right, this idea that Joseph's descendants are above the evil eye, it's like they're compared, as we'll see, to fish, and fish are not subject to the evil eye because they're underwater where the evil eye has no dominion. We'll come back to that a little later. Now, Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said that a proof for the notion that the evil eye holds no sway over Joseph and his descendants and his descendants is from here. Jacob's blessing of Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. The angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named in them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude, veyidgu, in the midst of the earth. Genesis 48:16. And this term veyidgu, multitude, is related etymologically to the word for fish, dag. So just as with regard to fish in the sea, water covers them and the evil eye has no dominion over them, so too the seed of Joseph, the evil eye has no dominion over them. So it's a somewhat convoluted thing, but this idea that Joseph, the descendants of Joseph wanted more land, they didn't get it. Maybe what Joshua was saying to them, you want more land, go conquer more land. But since he said to them, go into the forests, our sages read into that the additional meaning that, hey, you're bragging about the fact that you're having more children than the other tribes. That's the sort of thing where people should not be saying that, right? Saying to other people, hey, I have more kids than you. God forbid somebody should say that, because it's the kind of statement that would attract the evil eye. When you brag about blessings that you've got, whether they be in, having many children or having wealth or having any kind of other luck, bragging about that among people who have less is a sort of thing that could attract jealousy, envy. And when people are jealous of you, right, they're looking at you in a way that could cause, the evil eye to lead to your misfortune. And we're going to go to a new subject. The Gemara analyzes the next section of the Baraisa that we were discussing, which said, with regard to the 12 spies sent to survey Eretz Yisroel prior to the Jewish people's entry into the land, Joshua and Caleb, Yehoshua and Caleb, took all of the spies' portions of the land, right? 12 spies, one from each tribe, were sent to look at the land, ahead of the people coming in. They brought back an evil report that, yeah, the land is incredible, fantastic, but it's occupied by giants and we're never going to be able to defeat them. A ridiculous thing to say when God has just escorted you out of Egypt through great miracles and is sustaining you at every moment with the spring of water, that's a miracle, with the manna that appears every morning, and with the clouds of glory that are shielding the encampment from the harsh sun in the desert. And some would say that these spies, they weren't such total idiots, but what they were saying is, we've got a beautiful situation here. We're learning Torah directly from Moses, who's learning it directly from God. All our needs are taken care of. We should just stay in the wilderness yeshiva, as it were. That's one interpretation. But at any rate, when they brought back that evil report, all the people panicked, lost their heads. And then God said, you're panicked? You don't think I'm going to escort you in? You know what? You people are not ready. This is the generation that came out of Egypt that has a slave mentality. You need to die out in the desert, and your children will inherit that land. Your children who you panicked and said they would be killed by these people, your children are going to be the ones that enter the land, not you. Now, who caused that panic? 10 of the 12 spies. Who was loyal to Moses and to God? Joshua and Caleb. So here this Baraisa says that those other 10 who caused this tremendous panic, they didn't receive portions in the land, nor their children apparently, because Joshua and Caleb got the portion of the 10 other spies. And that's why we would like that final interpretation that we heard yesterday, that what they did is they used both censuses, right? So everyone who came out of Egypt got a portion, and then their children inherited that. And everyone who's about to enter the land get a portion. So if somebody was alive in both places, or had a father, right, who was, so they get their own portion plus their father's portion. So maybe the children of the spies didn't get their father's portion, but they got their own portion. Let us hope. At any rate, regarding this episode, it says that Joshua and Caleb took the other spies' portions of land. So the Gemara asks, from where is this matter derived? How do we know that they got the portions of the other spies? So Ula said, it is as the verse states, Numbers 14:38, but Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, lived of those men that went to spy out the land, right? Of the ones who went to spy out the land, these are the ones who lived. They didn't die out in the wilderness. They were still alive to enter later. Now, what does the term lived mean? If we say that it means literally that they lived, but there is another verse that states, and there was none left, a man of them, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. Numbers 26:65. So why would the Torah state it twice? Rather, what does the term lived mean? That Joshua and Caleb lived in the other spies' portions of land. So the Baraisa teaches that the protesters and back to the Baraisa, the protesters and the assembly of Korach did not possess a portion of Eretz Yisroel. Right? These people caused other problems, not the spies, but other episodes, like the rebellion of Korach, who made a rebellion against Moshe. So what about them? They lost their portions also. Let's keep reading. Right, the Baraisa teaches that the protesters in the assembly of Korach did not possess a portion of Eretz Yisroel. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught otherwise in a Baraisa? With regard to the spies, the protesters, and the assembly of Korach, Joshua and Caleb took their portions of land. So apparently the protesters and the assembly of Korach were assigned portions in Eretz Yisroel, which were then given to Joshua and Caleb. So the Gemara answers, it is not difficult. One sage, the Tana of the Baraisa quoted earlier, juxtaposes the protesters to the spies, teaching that just as the spies were assigned a portion of Eretz Yisroel, so were the protesters. And the other sage, the Tana of the Baraisa quoted here, does not juxtapose the protesters to the spies. Although the spies were assigned a portion, the protesters were never even given a portion. So the Gemara quotes a related baraisa, as it is taught in a baraisa that the verse quotes the daughters of Zelophehad. So the daughters themselves said, "Our father died in the wilderness, and he was not among the assembly of them that gathered themselves against the Lord in the assembly of Korach, but he died of his own sin, and he had no sons. And the daughters of Zelophehad therefore claim they are entitled to his portion. Our father died in the wilderness." This phrase is referring to Zelophehad. "And he was not among the assembly." This is referring to the assembly of spies that gathered themselves against the Lord. These are the protesters in the assembly of Korach. This is in accordance with the straightforward meaning, those who sided with Korach in his rebellion against Moses. And it is clear from the verse that the people in these categories were not entitled to a portion in Eretz Yisroel. Now, is that to say that they got a portion and then it was taken from them, or that they were never assigned one? Let's keep reading. So the Gemara concludes, one sage juxtaposes the protesters to the spies, so that Joshua and Caleb inherited the portions of both, and the other sage does not juxtapose the protesters to the spies. Now the Gemara presents Rav Papa's fourth question. And Rav Papa said to Abaye, and according to the one who juxtaposes the protesters to the spies, is it reasonable that Joshua and Caleb contested the spies and inherited all of Eretz Yisroel? Many of the Jewish people protested in the wilderness at one point or another, and it cannot be that Joshua and Caleb received all of their portions by virtue of their not participating in the sin of the spies. So Abaye said to him, we are referring to the protesters who were among the assembly of Korach. Now, this term is not referring to all those who protested, but rather to the 250 individuals who protested along with Korach, and it is their portions of land that Joshua and Caleb received. Now, the Gemara returns to the Baraisa and presents the fifth question that Rav Papa asked Abaye. Granted, according to the one who says that Eretz Yisroel was divided among those who left Egypt, this is as it is written with regard to the inheritance of the tribe of Menashe. Right? Menashe and Ephraim were the two sons of Jacob. Menashe is the tribe that ended up splitting up into two parts. Half of them were along with Reuben and Gad, and said, as Joshua was about to take the children of Israel into the land, they said, listen, this land over here on the east side of the Jordan River, it's perfect for us. Let us take our portion here. Moses says, what is the matter with you? The last time people were not ready to go in, it cost 40 years of wandering in the desert. The Lord, God, is about to give us this whole promised land, and you don't want to go in and fight alongside your brethren? They said, no. Of course we're going to fight alongside our brethren. We're going to help conquer the land. But we can take our portion here, and that would actually just make the Holy Land bigger. And so they made a deal, and Moses accepted the deal and said, okay, if you will go in alongside all your brethren and do the wars of conquest that are now needed to drive out these, child-sacrificing, idolatrous peoples, then when all that is done, you can inherit this portion on the east side of the Jordan. And so Menashe, half of Menashe was on the east side, and half of Menashe would take its portion among the other tribes on the west side of the Jordan River. Okay, now let's see the question. So granted, according to the one who says that the land of Israel was divided up among those who left Egypt, the earlier census, this is as it is written with regard to the inheritance of the tribe of Menashe, quote, and 10 parts fell to Menashe besides the land of Gilead and Bashan, which is beyond the Jordan, because the daughters of Menashe had an inheritance among his sons. We learned that Joshua chapter 17 verses 5 and 6. So 6 were the portions of the 6 fathers' houses of Menashe listed in a previous verse in Joshua 17:2, and 4 parts of the daughters of Zelophehad, and that is 10 parts. But according to the one who says that Eretz Yisroel was divided among those who entered the land, the later census, Well, there were 8 parts as follows. 6 were the portions of the 6 fathers' houses when they list the genealogy of Menashe. 6 were the portions of the 6 fathers' houses, and 2 of theirs, which they received from the estate of their grandfather, Hefer, of whom Zelophehad was the firstborn. That is 8. So Zelophehad himself, by contrast, was not entitled to a portion, as he did not enter the land of Israel. Now the Gemara objects, and according to your reasoning, but even according to the one who says that Eretz Yisroel was divided among those who left Egypt, there are only 9 parts, as the Mishna on page 116b states that Zelophehad's daughters took 3 parts. So rather, what have you to say? How can the Mishnah be reconciled with the verse? One must say that according to the opinion that Eretz Yisroel was divided among those who left Egypt, they had one unmentioned paternal uncle who died without children, and Zelophehad's estate received a share of his portion. So too, according to the opinion that Eretz Yisroel was divided among those who entered the land, the later census, it could be said that they had 2 unmentioned paternal uncles, so that they received 2 additional portions of land. And the fact that they received a portion from an uncle may be derived from a verse, as it is taught in the Baraisa, that the verse states, Numbers 27:7, you shall give, naton titen, you shall give them a possession of an inheritance. And this is referring to the inheritance of their father. And the verse continues, among their father's brothers. This is referring to the inheritance of their grandfather, their father's father. And the verse continues, and you shall pass the inheritance of their father to them. This is referring to the portion of the firstborn to which Zelophehad was entitled. And the Baraisa continues, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, they also took a portion of their father's brother, as it is stated, you shall give naton titen. The double expression indicates that they received an additional portion. And the Gemara notes, and according to the one who says that they had 2 paternal uncles, that additional portion is derived from the phrase, you shall give them a possession of an inheritance, which would be superfluous were it not to indicate an additional portion that they received. I'm almost done. So if you've got questions or comments, please get them in now. Okay. Very good. Now the Gemara presents the 6th question that Rav Papa asked Abaye. In the verse quoted above, what portions is it counting? If the verse is counting children, i.e. the portions of those who inherited from their ancestors, as with the daughters of Zelophehad, well, there were many such portions, and the verse did not enumerate all portions inherited by all members of the tribe. And if the verse is counting fathers' houses, there are only 6, as Hefer, the father of Zelophehad, is included among the 6 enumerated in Joshua 17:2. Why then does the verse count the portions of the daughters of Zelophehad separately? And the Gemara answers, actually the verse is counting fathers' houses, and by also counting the inheritance of Zelophehad's daughters, the verse teaches us this, that the daughters of Zelophehad took the portion of the firstborn due to their father, since he was a firstborn. Evidently, the land of Israel is considered already in possession of one who was entitled to his portion of the land, even before the land was assigned. Although a firstborn son does not take a double portion of property due to his deceased father, as he does the property that his father possessed, it is considered that Hefer possessed the portion that would eventually be assigned to him, and that Zelophehad was entitled to a double portion. Now, this has gotten pretty far into the weeds, but let's just kind of pop out. We're moving on to questions now. But the idea was, we've been talking about when someone dies and doesn't leave a will, how is his property bequeathed to his children? If he has multiple sons, the oldest son, if he is a firstborn, is going to take a double portion. The other sons would then get equal portions, 1/2 as big as the firstborn son. If there are no sons, the daughters inherit. If there are no children, but he leaves his father, it's going to go back to the father, and then from the father will get redistributed among the father's children, the father of this deceased, and then it can go to sort of other children who would be nephews of the original deceased, etc. And to help us understand that kind of inheritance law, we looked at how the land was apportioned to the children of Israel entering the land. Why does it matter here? Because there's this idea of inheritance. And if the land was apportioned to those counted in the census when they first left Egypt, so then, they didn't make it to the promised land, since they all died out in the wilderness, but their children would receive those portions even though they didn't own it yet, right? So they were entitled to a portion eventually when the children of Israel enter the promised land, but these people died in the wilderness. So it's like they received the right to a portion, and that right to a portion was passed down. Now, normally, what somebody's entitled to, but they're already dead, they don't get, and it's not bequeathed. It goes somewhere else. But assigning portions of land to the families of Israel, that had its own special rules, as we've been reading. So it's a little bit complicated to learn out from how the land of Israel was apportioned to, the descendants of Jacob as they're coming out of Egypt, and then into the wilderness, and then into the land. It's a little bit tricky to, whatever we learn about that, to use that as a precedent for inheritance law, and so they're being very careful to keep those distinctions in mind. Okay, let's see if there's some questions or comments that I can take on Bava Basra 118. Joe, hey, you promised to shake the lulav in esrog. There's a tiny bit of daylight left. We don't do it at night. Sorry about that. Thank you for the reminder. I'll do it in tomorrow's class. I may not be able to be in the sukkah for tomorrow's class because we're having people over for dinner, and we'll have to have set up for the dinner before I can teach the class. But I'll do it then. God willing, I will remember to do it then. Thank you for the reminder. Sharon, I always think that giving Ephraim and Manasseh equal portions was a backhanded way for Jacob to give Joseph a double portion, even though he was the firstborn of the more beloved wife, and not the firstborn of the 12 sons, since he was born much later, contrary to Torah law. That's an interesting interpretation. And it's not only the firstborn of the more beloved wife, but it's also his favorite son, right? And the one that had caused so much service, right? I mean, Jacob thought for 20 years he'd been told that Joseph was dead. Now his heart told him not to believe it. And that's why we say that he never stopped, mourning, maybe never stopped hoping. And eventually Joseph was restored to Jacob, and with that kind of emotional baggage, emotional backstory, let's say, maybe there's something to what you're saying, Sharon. It's an interesting interpretation. Bill, how do we know that, quote, he was not in the assembly of those who rose against Moses, is two phrases, the assembly for the spies and those who rose against for Korach, as opposed to one phrase? Okay, great question. I was thinking the same thing as I'm reading it. Why do the sages have license to take what on the surface meaning just seems to be sort of like extra phrases, just to be more specific? Those of the assembly who rose up against Moses, maybe it's just those who were in the group that aligned themselves with Korach, or those who were in the group that aligned themselves with the spies. Why are we going to interpret that the two phrases, which seem to be talking about the same people, actually refer to two separate groups? And basically the answer to that, the answers to so many questions, is that the sages of the Gemara, who lived 2,000 years ago, were much closer in time to the giving of Torah, which was 3,300 years ago. So for us, 3,300 years ago. For them, 1,300 years earlier. And therefore, they, were receiving, in the chain of transmission of teacher to student, they were much closer to those original teachings, and the teachings had been less diluted, had been, passed from very high level sage to very high level sage, and always a little bit is lost So over 3,300 years, much more is lost than was lost in the initial 1,300 years. That's one reason. Another reason might well be that it was just a tradition that was passed down, that this is how we interpret this text from the people who were there, right? So certain core oral teachings were given from God to Moses, from Moses to Joshua, from Joshua to the elders. And the idea that we could interpret certain things in this way might have been among those core teachings that were part of, that initial oral law. And that's why they take the not the liberty, but they know that is so, and that's why they take it that way. And we take it on faith from our sages that was the correct interpretation. And finally, Melissa, thank you for inviting us to your beautiful sukkah. Thank you so much. The lighting has really changed since I started 37 minutes ago, because we're in B'nai Hashemashas, we're in twilight as it's happening now. So thank you. Yeah, and I can even show you around a little bit more. Over there, this is kind of like some of the lighting that we have here in the sukkah. And this red cloth that's hanging is actually harvested from our movie, When Do We Eat? It's featured an important scene there. These are our dining room chairs that we have brought out here. And this sukkah, it's a sukkah kit that I purchased 20 years ago, and we've been building in our backyard ever since. And then if you look up there, you can see a little bit of the schach, right? So the roofing material. In this case, it's made out of bamboo. It has to be made out of something that was grown from the ground, but has been cut from the ground. And that you can see through it. If you were to look straight up, you could actually see the moon up there. It's LA, so you're not going to see much of the stars. But you have to be able to see through the schach, so it blocks out most of the sun, but not all of it. And that's part of the requirements of the schach. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday, at the regular Tuesday time. Monday, at the regular Monday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night. Modim l'simcha. Good morning.